So, you want a 1911. You just yearn for that old school Americana firearm. Quintessential American horsepower in a handgun. Alright, let's talk about that. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about this subject matter and, God willing, much more the right way, with God Almighty at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to serve you as host, military, law enforcement, private security, contracting, and a bunch of other gun-related stuff, handgun instructor, competition shooting, a state rifle and pistol champion a few times over. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Okay, let's talk about 1911s. Why? It's been a while since I've talked about them. I have been doing a lot more hunting-related content lately. I think a lot because I have been working a lot of extra on the private security contracting end. That's still my primary breadwinning job. And I'm stuck in urban environments, all tacticaled out, body armor, jungle boots, war belt. And so I yearn for the mountains. It's actually, I'm driving back from there now. Spent a day off up in the mountains, scouting around with the Ridgeback and the Scout rifle. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the 1911. So let's get back to some more tactical firearm talk. The 1911. I have quite a bit of experience with 1911. I carry one on duty, not all the time, but sometimes as the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, depending on the mission, I would carry a 1911, a Colt M45A1. Perhaps the best combat 1911 ever. Like, not as far as history goes, but as far as modern capability goes. Fantastic fighting 1911 Colt M45A1. I sold that because I needed the money at the time to raise money for going to live in Alaska. But I kind of wish I'd kept it. But I carried that on duty in the real world, right? And if you count 2011s, I have a lot of experience with 2011s. Competitions and carrying those on duty. That was actually when I wasn't carrying the 1911. I carried the 2011 STI, now Staccato 2011s. Anyway, so if you count those, quite a bit of experience. And just shooting for fun, I have a Colt Combat Elite that I am blessed to have. That's crazy accurate. That's great to shoot. That I sometimes just carry in the backcountry with, like solid, truncated cone flat fronted bullets for doing stuff out in the backcountry. So anyway, the 1911, let's talk about it. What are my bottom line up front? What are my number one choices right now? If you were like, hey, I want a 1911, I want, the classic lines of a 1911, I want the esprit de corps of a 1911. However, I want a little bit more modern features, kind of the best of what I would consider a true 1911. Single stack, right? You could argue what is a true 1911. You could say if it's not a GI issued, Remington Rand or Colt, it's not an actual 1911. If it's not stamped, with a bursting bomb from the U.S. arsenal, it's not a 1911. But that's not, I'm saying like it's a 1911. And you want a good modern version of that. Good modern sights, good modern beaver tail. I'm going to give you two choices. One is the Colt. Any of the Colts with the modern beaver tail, I would suggest if you want to, you want to push yourself in marksmanship and you're like, I've been plateauing with this, run-of-the-mill, bottom-of-the-barrel Glock 19, Glock 17, whatever. I want better marksmanship. I want to see how good a marksman I can be with a handgun. Get the national match barrel. Get one of the models with a national match barrel. Something like a Colt Combat Elite. Something like a Colt Gold Cup, depending on your mission, depending on your goals. But a Colt Gold Cup has been a gold standard for a long, long time. Fantastic firearm. If you want something a little bit more tactical, you're actually going to carry it. Colt Combat Elite. The Colt... There's another one. It's like the something unit. It's a very good one as well. The Colt Rail. They have one with a rail if you want one with a rail. Those are fantastic. But Colt has been making 1911s over 100 years. They know how to make a good 1911. Their quality control is fantastic. Colt makes good stuff, and they're not as expensive as you might think, right? They're in the ballpark of a good 1911. So any of those models of Colt 1911. Let's see here. My next recommendation, if you just want a workhorse and you want to save a little bit of money, but you want a fully capable, decently modernized 1911, then get it in the Ruger SR 1911. There's a couple of different models, but get just a regular. I would suggest stainless if you can get stainless. Almost always get stainless. Their Colt SR 1911. It's a fantastic gun. It's a workhorse. It's going to be a little bit cheaper than a Colt. Not a crazy amount more. It's not a lot cheaper, but it's a good American-made 1911. Whether the Colt or the SR 1911. If you want really the esprit de corps of the 1911, get it in 45 ACP single stack. I mean, they're fantastic. That's kind of, if you're an American and you're at all into guns, I suggest you probably have at least one, 45 1911. So if that interests you, both of those models are going to be my number one and number two recommendations. They're not the only ones out there. If you want to get a Springfield, just get it and then strip every part out of it except for the slide and the frame and spend a bunch of money, probably more than you would spend on a Colt, turning it into a halfway decent gun. I forget, it was one of those stupid names that Springfield loves, like Operator or Super Gucci Tactical Guy, whatever, like 1911 stainless steel. That thing wouldn't run for anything. I couldn't get it to run. Different springs, different ammo. That thing was garbage. Much like many of the other Springfields that I've talked about and reviewed and owned. It was a bad gun. And the guys that I know that have had Springfields, they're just apologists for the Springfield. They're just like, once I do this, it will run reliably. Once I do that, it will run reliably. I'm sure if I just polish this out, it will actually work. I've never seen a Springfield 1911 that actually worked. And by that I mean taken to legit training. If you're like, I'm going to go to an indoor range and shoot a magazine through it when it's completely clean, yeah, it'll probably run a magazine. But if you're talking about, I'm going to go take a training class where I'm going to shoot a couple of thousand rounds through it, I haven't seen any Springfields I would call reliable. I'm sure there's one out there, so I'm sure the unicorn is out there somewhere, but I don't recommend you get a Springfield. I know they say Operator and Super Gucci and whatever on there, but they just don't work. So anyway, some other ones, actually one that does work, it's not American made, so that kind of to me defeats the purpose of a 1911, but actually the Taurus, I think they might just call it the Taurus 1911, but they've been making 1911s a long time. And the 1911s are actually one of the guns I don't know that they ever had quality control issues with. So if you want if you're not going to carry it right away and you're going to put some rounds to it and test it out, man, those Taurus 1911s, you get a lot of features for the money. They're going to be even cheaper than the Ruger. So if you just want the look of a 1911, but you don't care about American made, those Tauruses are pretty good. If you offered me one or the other, I would take a Taurus over a Springfield all day long. There are many other companies that make them. Kimber makes some good ones. Kimber has had some quality control issues in the past, but mostly that's on their small guns. They try and take a 1911 and Honey, I Shrunk the 1911 and make it really small. I'd stay away from those in any brand, but especially the Kimbers are kind of known for that. But they're full size, like just your standard size 1911s. They're decent. They're not horrible guns. Couple of things you should be mindful of in 1911s. There are this is not exactly true, but they're generally referred to in common 1911 vernacular as a Model 70 and Model 80. A Model 70 is not drop safe. Oh no, don't let the gun tube glitterati find out. They will never have let us win 2 world wars with those. The original Colt is not drop safe. It's a Series 70. It has no drop safety. It's got the best trigger. The Series 70s have the best trigger. If you want the best trigger, get a Series 70. There is the Series 80, commonly referred to as the Series 80, has a plunger, much like you'd see on a 1911 or most modern polymer striker-fired guns. This was, in America, it was a black eye in the American gun culture when the American gun company just bent over backwards to appease the anti-gunners. It's like the 80s, 90s when the big assault weapons ban was going on. They were putting locks on revolvers and safeties on revolvers and safeties on lever action rifles that had never needed them for 100 years. This was in that era. The Series 80 came out, and you can get a Series 80 with a good trigger. It takes more work. It's also drop safe. So if you want a drop safe one, there's that. I think there's another model. I think Kimber may use this model. I've never owned a Kimber 1911, but theirs is a little bit different where the backstrap safety actually disengages the plunger. And that I've heard does not affect. So if you want kind of the best of both, that Kimber seems to be a good mechanism. But just be aware of that. There are drop safe 1911s and non-drop safe 1911s. You can also make them drop safe with a titanium firing pin and an extra power firing pin spring. So there's ways to do that without putting the stupid, extra mechanism in there, making the mechanism even more complicated. Which brings me to another point on the 1911. If you look at an exploded view, I thought everybody knew what an exploded view was, but this is just basically a piece of paper with a drawing of all the parts as if the gun had exploded, and then they take a screenshot of it, called an exploded view. So basically all the parts are kind of there so you can see them. If you look at an exploded view of, let's say, a 1911, even an original 1911, and a Glock 17, it's going to have way more moving parts. So this is something you should be aware of with a 1911. They have a lot more moving parts. They are a lot more complicated than than your standard polymer striker fire. Think of this like an AR-15 versus an AK-47. AK-47s are a lot simpler repeating firearm than if you look at the number of parts in an AK-47 versus like an AR-15. A lot more small moving parts in an AR-15. Same with a 1911. A lot more small moving parts in a 1911. It's a more complex, I'd say more elegant machine, but more complex than your standard range fodder polymer striker fire of today. So just be aware of that. They're not like plug and play like a Glock. Like you can buy plenty of aftermarket stuff, but like let's say you broke your extractor in your Glock 17. Well, you can order another extractor from whomever on the internet, have it, install it at your kitchen table, and just put it in there, and it's probably going to work just fine. Always test fire your kit, but not so with a 1911. Like you got to tune a 1911 extractor. If you want to get a different mainspring, you're probably going to have to fiddle with it to get it to work right. If you're going to replace the firing pin, that one's pretty easy, but the back plate you may have issues fitting. So these are just things to be aware of. It's not as like, if you're the guy that just likes to swap out parts all the time, like on your Glock, you're not doing that on a 1911. You can do it, but it may or may not work. It may or may not fit. So you had better be familiar with jeweler's files, hand files, Dremel tools, polishing stones, things like that if you want the gun to run reliably and not go full auto on you and like uncontrollable full auto. So just be aware of that on the 1911. It's not as forgiving a platform to work on. It takes some skill. You need to be much more of like a kind of a machinist than just like a plug and play thing like you would do on an AR-15 or polymer striker fire. Also, because of this, generally, there's three overlapping realms. If we make a Venn diagram with three giant circles and they all have some overlap, you could have one circle, cheap 1911. You could have a really, really loose tolerance 1911. And you could have a really, really accurate 1911 and a really, really reliable 1911. I guess that's four circles, right? So generally, you're going to have to pick and choose these, and there's not going to be a lot of overlap unless you get really, really expensive. So generally, you can get a fairly cheap 1911 that rattles like a spray paint can that will be decently reliable because it has really loose tolerances. You can get a really tight-fitting 1911 that's fairly affordable, that can be fairly accurate because it has tight tolerances, but it may not be reliable because that's a really complex machine. If you want a really accurate, really reliable, really tight fit 1911 like that overlap in the Venn diagram, you're going to spend a lot of money. You're talking like Wilson Combat, Nighthawk Custom, something like that. So just be aware of that. So generally pick one or two of those, depending on what you want, right? So there is that. And I mean like very accurate. Like a decent 1911 is going to be, even a rattle can 1911 loose tolerances is probably going to be as accurate as a Glock and you'll probably shoot it more accurately because it's got a way better trigger. So just be aware of that and what I'm kind of talking about here. And if that even matters to you, right? If you're the guy that struggles to hit a silhouette target at 25 yards, and we all started somewhere, right? If you're that guy, this doesn't make any difference. You know, it's going to be way more accurate than that. But if you want to go from 3-inch groups at 25 yards to a 1-inch group at 25 yards and be really, really reliable, that's probably going to cost you some coin. So just be aware of that. I'll talk briefly here about the old GI spec 1911s. Those are good if you just want the history of it. If you're a collector for history, that's not me. But if you are, there's nothing wrong with those. They're completely, obviously serviceable. The where they kind of fall behind the modernized ones that I'm talking about is they have very small sights for such a big gun. They're very tiny sights, very hard to shoot at speed, combat shooting, which is funny because it's a combat gun, but you're talking about for the day, right? For 1911, they were good sights. We have better sights today. Also, you may want that extended beaver tail if you're trying to grab it really fast and shoot it in a hurry. Those are kind of nice. They exist for a reason. Let's see. Other than that, other than the sights and that beaver tail, there's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly good guns. But again, the more modern ones, I like stainless. That's just me. I like a national match barrel. That's just me. I like a flat trigger. I like a short reach flat trigger. Just my personal preference. You may like something else. But I like this more modern features, especially the sights, really good, Novak style. You might want tritium. You might want an optic on it, right? It is 2026. Those things give the 1911 some more modern capability, and it is amazing how well that 1911 has stood the test of time. Again, it is a piece of Americana firearm style. It's classic American. Let's briefly talk about 1911 is a 9mm. 9mm is the de facto handgun defensive caliber of our time, period. You can like it or not, but it is what it is. I don't think there's anything sacrilegious about a 1911 and 9mm. I think they're just fine. Especially if all you have is 9mm and you want a 1911 and you don't want to have to mess with another caliber. Yeah, 9mm. If you want a high volume practice, get one in 9mm. Nothing wrong with that. You're kind of shooting it's a little bit inefficient because that gun was made for a 45 and the 45 was made for that 1911. They kind of fit together. You're getting a little bit of wasted space, a little bit of extra action movement. Nothing crazy. You're talking about a single stack. You're going to pick up, I think, 2 more rounds. The original 1911 is 7 round, but a lot of the magazines now are 8 round flush fits. You can get obviously longer ones. You're going to go from an 8 round or a 7 round to a 9 round and a 9mm. Generally, maybe a 10 round. So you get a few more rounds. If you care about capacity, right, you're probably not getting a 1911 to start with. You're probably getting a 2011. But anyway, there's also some other calibers that they're known for. 10mm, obviously, kind of the same overall length. They're very close to a 45. So if you want the ballistic, differences in a 10mm, if it's going to be for handgun hunting, if it's going to be for something else, that you might want a 10mm for. 10mm obviously fits very well into a 1911. And if you're looking at that, I would recommend a Colt Delta Elite, or again, I think Ruger still makes one in a 10mm. They may have stopped, but there you go. So 10mm. There's also the 38 Super. Remember I said that you got a little bit of wasted space because a 9mm is shorter and everything than a 45. Well, the 38 Super is a lot more taking advantage of that space. You still get the extra round or 2, but you get more power. Like a 38 Super is more powerful than a 9mm. All that said, it's a kind of a proprietary, specialty, expensive round. But if you want a zippy, high velocity, like let's consider it a 9mm Magnum, get it in 38 Super. Nothing wrong with that. There have been 9mm in other calibers, but those are the big ones. So just know that those exist. Obviously, the OG is the 45 ACP, and it's a good round. Fairly slow velocity, even for a pistol round. Fairly heavy weight for a pistol round, but it's a good round. I don't not shoot a 45 that much or train with a 45 that much or carry a 45 that much because it's not a good round. It's because it's much more expensive to shoot the 9mm. And what counts is the training and getting your reps in. So that said, 45 ACP is a very good round ballistically. With that, guys, how about your tactical tip of the day? Recoil buffers for a 1911. If you're just going to shoot it every once in a while at the range, don't worry about it. If you are going to shoot thousands and thousands of rounds through them, get the shock buffers. They're super cheap. Wilson Combat makes them. Other companies make them as well. They can fit in some other firearms, but it goes on the recoil spring rod guide. And it basically just at the end of the stroke, so it doesn't batter the slide and the frame together, you got that little bit of polymer. It's considered like a gasket or like a gasket. And it's like a hard piece of rubber, and it just kind of dampens some of the battering and abuse that slide and frame get when they're slamming back and forth. So if you're going to shoot a lot, they're very cheap compared to the cost of a 1911 or the cost of even, a box or a couple of boxes of, a case of 45 ACP ammo. So, the shock buffers, they last quite a while too. You'll break them every once in a while, but think of the abuse that's saving on your gun. So, there's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. How about we recite Psalm 23? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.